This guy with a bow tie in Chattanooga, Tennessee, David Tulis.
More and more, Americans want godly government. And in the Republican primary in Alabama, they elected not Luther Strange, but Roy Moore, who is the former Ten Commandments judge and who believes in local economy. I say that because he believes that there has to be in human affairs an external law, a law outside of any one party, any one claque, any one cartel or group or family. And that law, of course, is God's law, summarized in the Ten Commandments in the Holy Scriptures. And if we have that law in play in our minds and in our desires and in our voting, then we have a real prospect for prosperity. We have, as he says, an opportunity to make America great again. And greatness cannot be had apart from this law system, which Roy Moore, who likely is the next federal senator from that state, one or two, without God's law, you're not going to have a just government. You will not have the state and its agents resting in their places, working in their places, and going no further than the law allows. The law, of course, would be statute, and the operation of statute limited, restrained its ambition, stolen from it by the Constitution and the respect of the office holder for the Constitution. I say that Roy Moore is the local economy candidate because he believes that the Constitution lives in the heart of every office holder, every person who swears an oath, right? The oath is made before God, and the obedience to that oath is not something that we charge to others. We don't say, well, I'm not sure about that. Let me check with the city attorney. Let me check with the city attorney. No. And so we in other words, we live out on city council. We live out the Constitution and the limits of the Constitution. In Chattanooga, we know that that's not the case. We know that except for Demetrius Coonrod, everybody on the council voted to have the Airbnb ordinance passed. That is plainly illegal. It's illegal on several points. And the fact that we have Wade Hinton there to prevent it is not of any account, because Wade Hinton is an attorney, right? He represents, according to his ethics vow, he represents the state and he represents the law for the protection of the people. But of course, we are very skeptical of these ethical promises anymore, because Wade Hinton, who controls the city government as an attorney, Wade Hinton said you can have an ordinance that allows for in the penalties provision of the Airbnb ordinance, the short-term vacation rental ordinance that goes into effect in a couple of days. You can have a penalty provision that talks about punishment and offenses, and has a third provision which makes it unconstitutional, and that is that each day that the violation continues shall be a separate offense. That is clearly unconstitutional. And so Wade Hinton, we trust on Wade Hinton to guide us, and the city council members. The city council members just say, well, we really, until we hear from Wade, we're just going to go ahead and do what's written in front of us, and we're going to vote for this ordinance. And everybody voted for it. All these good conservatives, right? Darren Ledford and the sponsor of the Airbnb map, the Wall of Beijing map on city council, Chip Henderson, they all voted for an illegal ordinance. And they did that because they don't believe in local economy. They believe that we have to rely on an outside source to interpret the Constitution for us. And yet the Constitution has many provisions that respect private property and respect you, the listener. And city council, led by Chip Henderson, followed up by the other members, all of whom simply rejected the categories in constitutional government. And I would say rejected the implications protecting private property in the Ten Commandments, because they relying on the attorney. They were relying on Wade Hinton. They passed this ordinance, which is unconstitutional on several points, several important points. It's plainly it's not just unconstitutional. I'd say it's godless, because what it does, it prevents private property owners who are not in commerce from using their houses as they see fit on the internet, right? I'll say something about the internet, but let it pass. The internet here at Gig City is important. In fact, we so much love the internet that we became reputed as the Gig City, because not only do we have the internet and believe in it, we want the fastest one. And so what we've had is the city council passing the Beijing Wall of Chattanooga with the fastest internet, preventing people from doing commerce on the internet unless they submit to this multi-page ordinance that goes into effect with, I have one page here printed out, and I'm holding it up for you, my viewer on Facebook at Nooga Radio, and you, my other viewer who sees everything backwards, right, on YouTube. I'm holding it up for you to look at in my formerly newsprint ink stained fingertips. 3 points of this statute, of this ordinance, which are illegal, because ordinances cannot punish, period. Ordinances and city governments do not have punitive authority, period. They don't. They can fine under the $50 fine provision of the Constitution up to $50, but they cannot punish, and they cannot repeat that permission times 5 if it's a 5-day offense, right? If the homeowner has his house for rent on an Airbnb platform or one like it for 5 days, that's 5 offenses. No, that's not possible. That is simply punitive, and it's illegal. And the High Court of Tennessee has said it's illegal. And maybe Wade Hinton hasn't read these cases lately, but Chattanooga versus Myers, late 90s, Chattanooga versus Davis, 2001, they say there is no punitive power. And so the question is begging. We have a court making a very good analysis on both of those cases out of Chattanooga. And we have the city attorney and the council, which doesn't believe in local economy, relying on external authority to explain the Constitution to its members. And we are going to have an ordinance which goes into effect, which offends private property, offends the innocent, harmless, and private use of a house, which is privately owned, and preventing people, creating a web around them. And then even worse, creating a map, as if somehow you can arbitrarily separate neighbors with a map line that says you are in the district and you may have an Airbnb house if you beg us permission by licensure. And you on the other side of the street, you may not, because you are not included in the map. So that is completely arbitrary and capricious. It's arbitrary and capricious to have a map at all. It is simply unconstitutional. But Roy Moore, who believes in godly government, says no. There is a way in which God lives in the heart of each person, and also, if you take an oath to uphold the Constitution, so does the Constitution. The Constitution lives wherever the oath is made before God, to uphold its every provision, limiting the office holder in what he does. Here now, we've got more to say about this, but Roy Moore is the local economy candidate because he believes in the 10 Commandments. Why? Again, because he believes in local authority, respecting the people under the oath and under the Constitution, respecting the people's rights, and not deigning to allow the state to interfere and mess with and intervene in private affairs, whether they are affairs of the church. And in his book, So Help Me God, he talks about that, where he opposed strongly a state intervention in an ecclesiastical dispute, and also limits on the judiciary. The judiciary does not make law. The judiciary in Alabama finally, after 12 years of litigation, ended in 2002 an equality funding scheme where the judge was given, before the legislature was given a funding bill to approve of, a circuit judge. It's just simply illegal. And Judge Moore rightly said this is a division of powers problem, and we do not have judges passing laws and dictating state outlays for schools. So we have a judge who believes in local economy. He says, where I live, the Constitution lives. Where I live, where I work, the Constitution lives, and the law of God lives as well. Where are you going to find security for your effects, for your life, for the life of the unborn child of your neighbor? Where are you going to find respect for godly principles that understand human nature, right? If not under the government or within the government or under the purview of the governing representation of a man like Roy Moore. So Christians more and more want to have godly government, and that vote in the primary in the General Assembly
When are we going to get back to the law?
Suggest that. Here's Roy Moore a couple days ago.
We need the law when we've done what he's done. We are living fat and happy. But hear the word of the Lord, ye children of Israel. Back in the days of Israel, it could be said of America. Hear the word of the Lord, ye children of America, for the Lord hath the controversy with the inhabitants of this land, because there's no truth nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. By swearing and lying and killing and stealing, they break forth, and blood toucheth blood. Therefore shall the land mourn, and everyone that liveth therein shall languish. We've forgotten God. We've forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied, enriched, and strengthened us, and vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our own hearts that all of these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we've become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God who made us. We've got to go back to God. We've got to go back to a moral base.
Moral base, Roy Moore says a couple days ago in the speech. This was 2 days ago. David Tulis.
It's a great honor for me, and you put yourself in my shoes. I'm just a country boy from North Alabama. And to have people like Steve Bannon, Nigel Farage, Saran Stacey, and Phil Robertson, and others who have talked to you, to have them come long distances. And I'm not forgetting Senator Tripp Pittman. Give him a hand. He's been very...
David Tulis.
But it's an honor for me. And I'm going to tell you, I would gladly have declined an honor to which I find myself unequal. I have not the calmness and impartiality which the infinite importance of this occasion demands. I will not deny the charge of my enemies that resentment for the accumulated injuries of our country and an ardor for a glory rising to enthusiasm may deprive me of that accuracy of judgment and expression which men of cooler passions might possess. So let me beseech you then to hear me with caution, to examine without prejudice and to correct the mistakes into which I may be hurried by my zeal. That was Samuel Adams on August 1st, 1776. When he's explaining to the people of the country why they even did the Declaration, why they did it. And we've forgotten. We've forgotten it's all about God. We have explored the temple of royalty, he said, and found that the idol that we bow down to has eyes that see not, ears that hear not our prayers, and a heart like the nether millstone. But we have this day restored the sovereign, to whom alone all men ought to be obedient. He reigns in heaven, and with a perpetuous eye beholds his subjects, assuming that freedom of thought and dignity of self-direction which he bestowed upon them. From the rising to the setting sun, may his kingdom come. We need to go back and learn our history. You know, today there's a big dispute about taking down monuments, about forgetting our history. We can't forget our history. If we forget our history, we will repeat it. America is great because America has overcome many, many problems. And when we take an oath to that flag, Pledge of Allegiance, or we stand up and sing the national anthem, we should be proud that we live in the greatest country of the world. We should appreciate people like Colonel Frazier. You don't have to tell him to stand at 93. He stands. Stand, therefore, as it says in Ephesians. He takes a stand for his country, and he still loves his country. My opinion. Guilty of treason toward my country, and an act of disloyalty toward the majesty of heaven, which I revere above all earthly kings. You know, I'm running for the United States Senate. Tomorrow is a very, very important time. This election is critical to this nation. For whatever reason, God has put me in this election at this time, and all the nation is watching. All Washington is watching to see what the people of Alabama do tomorrow.
This is David Tulis. We're listening to a clip from Roy Moore's presentation 2 days ago.
Will we take a stand against a Washington establishment who's trying to come down here and buy this election with $30 million? Will we send them a message? Very clear. Alabama can't be bought. Alabama will take a stand. And I'm going to tell you, when you do, everybody will see it. Everybody will be encouraged to take them on and stop the people that are trying to keep their jobs up there and do nothing. In November 2016, when Donald Trump was elected, everybody was filled with hope. Hope that we were going to have something happen in Washington. What have we had? Riots, demonstrations, protests. Nothing has happened. We've had bills, hundreds of bills, 500 in 2016, below 200, I'm understanding, in 2017. And how many have gone through the Senate? Because the Senate won't move. They don't want to move. If they did, how hard is it to repeal Obamacare?
No replace here, just repeal.
A vote, yes or no.
That is what the people want. This is David Tulis. We've been listening to a few minutes from a speech 2 days ago by Roy Moore, the known as the Ten Commandments judge. People still call him honorifically Judge Moore, though he's not a judge. And in America, there are not titles of nobility or royalty. So I would always refuse to call someone who was a former judge. I would just call him by Mr. He becomes a Mr. when he leaves office. We do not have that kind of sense of royalty, though it has long been part of the American mind, I think, to want to grant that to senators and mayors and so on. Even if Bob Corker, who's decommissioning himself in the federal Senate, becomes a candidate for governor, people will still be calling him Senator Corker. And though he may be running for another office, he promises to continue public service. Well, the point about Roy Moore, I think, that we want to make here is to think in terms of how he views the world. Yeah, of course, his perspective is scandalous to the left wing media. Even though HuffPo, which is redesigning itself to make itself more populist and less perhaps progressive, had a story a couple days ago about the resurrection of Roy Moore, written very fairly, a very fair analysis with not too much eyebrow raising by the writer in word selection. Roy Moore is a standout, but his argument is essentially that the state has to be bound by law, and the Constitution is the main law, and that law controls the law beneath it, which is statute, which of course is supposed to control the law beneath that, which is regulation written by the executive agencies in every state and in Washington that enforces the law, right? So you have regulations that are written ostensibly within the scope of authority, the view of particular statutes, the way of regulation and control of the people, and so we have a system of law that is we have the unelected enforcer writing his own rules to enforce the statute, which ostensibly binds him. So we have this vast system. We have the rise of the administrative state, the thing that cannot be deconstructed, as Steve Bannon initially proposed to do, and so there we have been. As a people, as Americans are, I would admit there are people, they have been subjected to a kind of neo-feudalism, a kind of neo-colonialism, neoliberalism out of Washington, and all the parts between. And I say all the points between Washington and the left coast is that these ideas are brought to life locally, right? The liberal ethic, the state ethic, the state is superior ethic is brought to life locally. And so the countervailing argument that Christendom would make, Christendom, of course, is the idea of a Christian civilization, which many Christians reject. Many Christians flatly reject it as works. They say, well, to care about court reform and judicial reform is simply works, they say. the idea of Christendom is that the law of God and in the human sort of repeating of its concepts in constitutions, these man-made laws restrain the offices of the bean counters and the taxers and the enforcers. And if we have fear of offending the Constitution, fear of offending God locally, we will have restrained government. And conversely, those who believe in the expansive state, they act expansively locally. So they live out locally their beliefs too. They have their own kind of local economy view, right? We'll expand the progressive state locally, office by office, program by program, subsidy by subsidy, grant by grant, application by grant application. We expand our reverence for our Holy Father in Washington and our holy state, right? The federal corporation, which is a kind of locus for worship, a kind of idol, a kind of Baal in our day. There is a choice, and my listener, don't be of two minds. This is David Tulis.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio.